Hello, everyone. This is your host, Sanjeev Goyal. Every month, we bring a futurist, a thought leader who is making that difference. This month, we have invited a very special friend of mine, Chetan Sharma. Chetan has spent more than 3 decades in the communication. To me, it seems like cell phone is not even 3 decades old. Let's ask him how he got started in communication 30 years ago, or almost 35 years ago. Chetan, welcome to our show.
Hey Sanjeev, thanks a lot for having me.
So, Chetan, before we jump and deep dive into complex topics, so first question I have for you is your IIT Roorkee graduate, you passed out in 1991. How you got into telecommunication was not really a big thing in India those days.
I would say it was by accident. I actually after Roorkee, I came to Kansas State to do my master's, and I was focused on biomedical engineering. And after I graduated, so I had done a bunch of signal processing work during that master's. And around that time, the startup was looking for somebody with signal processing expertise to detect fraud in cellular systems in the analog days.
Wow.
And so I said, this sounds pretty interesting project, and I joined that startup, Cellular Technical Services, and did a lot of systems engineering work. We used RF fingerprinting techniques to detect fraud in analog phones, to detect cloning fraud in particular, and build end-to-end system to terminate the call before it rang the other side if we detected that the call was fraudulent or not.
This is very interesting. So let's just go back. Isn't it these RF frauds are the reason Steve Jobs became Steve Jobs because he paid for his bills through that, as per the movie?
No, so RF, the cloning fraud was primarily a 1G issue. It was in the analog days, and with the digital communication systems that came after that in 2G and GSM and CDMA, that problem largely went away. There were other types of fraud that were occurring, but that went away. And so, subsequent to that, the algorithms got better and better, and cloning became incredibly harder in wireless systems.
Well, it's still happening, but we can talk about that. That's for some other day.
Yeah.
So, Chetan, can you tell us something about your IIT Roorkee days? Any interesting story or any incident which has profound impact on you till date?
Yeah, so I had a kind of a unique Roorkee experience because I was brought up in Roorkee, and so I spent majority of my time before coming here in Roorkee. And so my dad was a professor in chemistry department,
So that was
and
home
I
for you.
grew. Yeah, it was home for me. I grew around professors, kids who went into Roorkee, so it was kind of a natural destination for me, and so it didn't feel like a big deal when I kind of went from high school to Roorkee. And the experience, obviously, I mean, we took Roorkee for granted, but looking back, it was a very um, it was an amazing experience. Not only growing up, but kind of being part of the university as well. And obviously, we all have made our lifelong friends in the IITs that we have gone to, and so I was no different. Some of my best friendships were formed there. But some of the best times I had was in the hostels. And to this day, I remember fondly whenever I get together with my friends, the time
Awesome.
spent in hostels. And one of the things that we used to do was for either the evening snack or midnight snack was chai and samosa. And I remember those trips to the canteens, both inside and outside the university, very fondly. I used to play badminton a lot. I was on the team. I was the captain of the team, and spent 3 hours every day in courts.
Wow.
Indoor Roorkee
I
had
don't know how did
some of
you
the best
find that
courts.
much time. That's interesting. I'm sure a lot of our audience would love to know how the hell you find 3 hours in between exams and papers and minors and all the assignments.
Well, that's all I used to do outside of studies. So that was
Uh,
this was, and I used to just love playing badminton, and so I have
nice.
fond memories of those things.
Awesome. Awesome. So fast forward, you came to US and for last, I will say at least 20 years, you made your mission to really understand the communication and taking the communication to the next level. And if we look back, especially around 25, 30 years, when you and me were growing up, we didn't have any mobile phone. Even analog phone was a
Yeah.
luxury. So if we look at in last 3 decades, humanities has completely transformed itself. And the whole economy, if I look at it, it become more of a connection economy. So without
Yeah.
communication, there is no economy. What is your take on that? And what do you think? How the future look like? Especially, let's talk about next decade.
So, I remember in the late 90s, we were starting to work on some wireless internet protocols around what was called wireless access protocol or WAP. And it was very clear to me the whole notion that you can have information available from anywhere on these devices will be transformative. We clearly had Palm pilots and whatnot, so we had some indication. But I knew as soon as you can get all sorts of content from around the world on these devices, it will change the game. And so I kind of just went head deep into the mobile sector and worked across the ecosystem to kind of build networks, build strategies around how you're going to monetize these networks, what new application services are going to be launched, and so on and so forth. And that has been true from those early 2G days where that became possible to now even 5G, where you can do all sorts of new interesting things. As we think about going forward for the next 10 years, clearly 5G will take us deep into this decade as to what you can do with these devices, significantly higher throughputs, very low latency, and so on and so forth. But then the networks are becoming much more denser, and as such, you are seeing that we'll probably middle of the decade we'll start transitioning into 6G. And then we are talking about throughputs anywhere from 500 megabits to a gigabit per second and latency sub 10 millisecond. And so the experiences that we can have, the things that people are talking about, the metaverses type applications, will really be possible in those kind of network environments. And that changes the game in terms of how do you do not only industrial applications, but how do you do communications? How do you talk to one another? How do you do education? How do you reach out and collaborate? And so on and so forth. So I think this decade is going to be filled with absolutely step changes that will transform societies.
So, Chetan, majority of our audience are IIT alum or engineers, and they are really looking and dabbling in the area of either become an entrepreneur within their own organization, because there are tremendous opportunities in companies like Google and Cisco's to innovate and build the whole company itself. So entrepreneurship word has ever expanding now. And this is a perfect time to be an entrepreneur. We both know that. So what are the areas you see the major growth, and what suggestions you would like to give to our audience when it comes to specifically tapping 5G and potentially being preparing for 6G?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So to answer that, I'll take you back in time. So for the last 100 years, economists have been studying something called the long wave, where they study what are the significant changes that take place in society that are kind of happen not only 1 to 2 years, but kind of in 30-year time periods. And a lot of the things like industrial revolution, the steam engine, railways, and all these things have happened on a 30 to 40-year time scale. And so fast forward, and so this has been studied by economists like Schumter, Kondatev, and most recently by Carlota Perez of Venezuela. And so I've extended that thesis and what I've been calling as connected intelligence, whereas the system of software and sensors transforms economies, transforms industries. And so if you look at what happened in the last 10 years, you had smartphones, you had fast LTE networks, and you had the cloud. And so we had three inputs into the ecosystem, and the impact was tremendous. Like we had over 200 1 billion or more revenue streams created, new streams created, right? And this was roughly 10 streams in the internet and computer age 10 years prior to that, right? And so we had almost a 20x impact on the ecosystem as to what new stuff came into the economy. So my thesis is that when you get the number of inputs to the ecosystem increases, you see an impact on the output as well. So we had computer and internet as two inputs. Then we had LTE, as smartphones, and cloud as three inputs. And now for the next 10 years, at least, we have multiple inputs. You know, you have 5G, you have AI and machine learning, you have blockchain, you have robotics, you have kind of the XR, VR, metaverse type of experiences. So all these are going to have just an enormous impact on society as well as the economies. And so what I would advise the entrepreneurs is to look at the intersections of these technologies. And so just like 4G and cloud, or 4G and smartphone created new industries like, you know, the Ubers and Airbnbs of the world, we're likely to see a similar effect of 5G and AI, or 5G and blockchain, or blockchain and robotics, or robotics and metaverse. And then if you add further a few years, quantum computing is coming, which will again have an impact. So I think the most interesting things happen at the intersection of these fundamentally changing technologies. And I think that's where a lot of the new revenue and new creation will come from in the next decade.
That brings another question. When you talk about connected intelligence, now, can you define a little bit better, because not many of our audience will be familiar. I mean, I get it, but if you can elaborate a little bit more, that would be very helpful.
Yeah. So it's you know, the most kind of basic definition is sensors plus software. So you apply sensors plus software to any industry, and you can see the intelligence emerge out of that layer. And so you make any industry connected to data, connected to people, connected to employees and resources, and you use software for automation. And that's what your transformation strategy looks like, right? And so now there are multiple layers to it. One is the connectivity layer, which is clearly fiber. Then you have things like 5G and Wi-Fi. But then on kind of the intelligence layer, you have AI and machine learning. On the user experience layer, you have the metaverse. Mm-hmm. And so all these layers start to change and shifts how we interact with people and how we interact with information. And so clearly the sensor part gets better and better, and the software part gets better and better. So that's how kind of I have it in my head.
It's interesting, because when I think of connected intelligence, in my mind is like it's the different nodes, and we have a lot of different kind of data available, and combined we are creating some value with that. So which is very similar to like IoT kind of devices, we talk about it. But how about if we expand it and we create more like a connected intelligence at the people's level? So how do we tap into that kind of intellectual capabilities we have across the organization? So another big area, what I think about, Chetan, is intelligence is available at multiple places, but the challenge is it's not being put together. We have intelligence in IITs, we have intelligence in a lot of organizations, we have in government institution and people. How do we bring all that together? And there is a desire, deep desire. I talk to all of them to collaborate. And do you see our technology like 5G is going to make it possible? And if it is, then how?
Yeah, so 5G, you know, one of the things that I didn't mention is edge computing. And edge computing, I think, is one of those significant shift in computing where you go from kind of centralized computing to decentralized computing. And I think as a person, you are interacting with outside information, and you have need for computing resources. So instead of going to the cloud, you just go to the edge to do your computational needs, and that opens up a whole new set of trillion-dollar industries. Now, on a people point of view, you know, you have knowledge what you're asking is, you have knowledge in these brains all across the world, and how do you tap into that? And so you need to have the exposure of the sensors that reside in the brain, right? You need to know that X, Y, Z, and the millionth person
No,
have this.
actually, I didn't mean that. I meant like there is a lot of amazing work is done at the institutional level,
Yeah,
organizational level, and then even at the
yeah,
government level. But there is
yeah,
no way to access it. Like, for example, IIT Delhi today, I know, has 3,000 PhD students, and they're doing phenomenal
yeah,
work. I don't know
yeah,
how to bring that knowledge to everybody, right? And
yeah,
same way, there is a lot of amazing work companies does, and they throw away these codes, right? Even in our
yeah,
own organization, I see it all the time. And you consult with the biggest even companies like Qualcomm. There is so much amazing work, which maybe 90% finished, maybe 80% finished, or maybe just
yeah,
inspired somebody. Can we
yeah,
use the technology to bring all that intelligence together? So it is available, and we figure out a way what to do with it. But we know when Google started, or when Yahoo started, actually, really, search engine started, was all about bringing the information. Nobody care what it is. It's just bring the damn
yeah,
information, because access to
yeah,
information. My question is, can we create the same thing, access to intelligence? Because just information is not interesting enough.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you can. So, I mean, it's the exposure and attributes that you attach to that intelligence.
Mhm.
Uh, the challenge is how to do it in automated way, right? And so you have 3,000 PhDs working on very interesting stuff, and their work has attributes.
Mhm.
Attributes has more detail. So you need to expose that layer to the outside world to query on, right? And so somebody says, I have this specific problem that I am trying to solve. Has anybody done it? Right? Unless that attribute is tagged somewhere,
Mhm.
cannot extract that, right? You only find that out through network. Like, hey, Mr. Professor at IIT Delhi, do you know of anybody who's working on this? And then they might provide you. And so I think the challenges of kind of you have to automate the process of exposing all this information in some form of a centralized or some form of connected decentralized databases where it becomes a marketplace in some sense. So somebody has done the code, it's available, and so there are some efforts like that, but it's not at the scale that you are thinking about
Yeah,
yet.
at the global scale. So I will
Yeah.
push this a little bit forward, because my
Mm-hmm.
role is in this of bringing people like you
Yeah.
is really pushing the
Yeah.
envelope a little bit, right? And
Sure.
so where I see the challenges, technology is moving at a rocket speed. I
Mm-hmm.
still believe that connectedness, we talked about it in the boardrooms and in the meetings, is still not getting to where it should be for a world to evolve to the next level. Right?
Yeah.
It's happening, but not the collaboration. Now,
Yeah.
we know if we didn't have NASA invested that kind of money for the programs they did, we may not even have the internet today or wireless phones.
Yes.
Right? So we saw how a federal agency or government organization does that, and then they do all these kind of things. So the problem is we need, and I'm going to kind of underplay the thing, but what I'm trying to say is we need new kind of browsers, because in reality, if we
Mm-hmm.
go back, we didn't even have a proper HTML scripting language at that time. Now that
Yeah.
has evolved in last 25 years. Today we have JavaScript, we have like million versions of a scripting language. So this browser become a place for me to read it, right? All it was really displaying a damn page, right? We didn't have any
Yeah.
videos, even images was really clunky, right? Today we can even do a complete video conferencing the way we are doing using those protocols. So the point I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to make it is, can we create a better version of this? So using technology, can we propose better standards so we can communicate and we can create
Yeah.
such systems?
Sure, sure. I mean, clearly there is a need for much better tools than what we have to really digest the information that's getting created every day. And so one problem is in the data capture, and the other is in how you manipulate data, right? The manipulating data and information through tools like Excel seems so archaic. We do have things like VR and metaverse coming in,
Mm-hmm.
where possibly you can manipulate gigabytes of data at much much more intuitively and easily, and the information and the intelligence just surfaces up, right? In terms of, and your way to query huge databases, that capability and those tools improve as well. So I see all of that improving without a doubt. And so I think both capture as well as exposure and manipulation of data they need better tools.
So let's fast forward and let's talk about simple things, right? So peer-to-peer computing and peer-to-peer communication is around for longest time. But
Yeah.
I haven't seen really a commercial application till now other than Napster or infamous Napster.
Yeah.
Do you see technologies like 5G is going to create more such opportunities where we kind of eliminate, so everything is kind of decentralized?
So 5G is an enabler, right? How people use it, um, uh, will define what happens with on top of the 5G layer, right? So I think clearly 5G is a fabric that's critical for evolution of the internet and how we access information. But at the same time, edge computing provides another decentralized layer in the ecosystem. And so if you think about, say, whatever 100, 200 data centers, big data centers that we have around the world, all of a sudden you can have millions of data centers in cell sites, right? And so the processing capability changes drastically. You might not need you might not even need cell sites. If you and I are in proximity, we can communicate without going through the cell tower, right? Device to device technologies are coming into play as well. And so we'll see that there are a bunch of these nodes that are happening, and at a just enormous scale. The scale is just totally different. And so what you can do with things like blockchain in terms of verification, in terms of authentication, in terms of reliability of information, reducing fraud, for instance, I think changes dramatically. And so 5G, I think, is a facilitator of those types of ideas as the underlying layer, access layer for the ecosystem.
Right. So for our audience, I wanted to summarize. I've learned some very interesting thing, but what I hear is because of the edge computing and the 5G, now we can really create some pretty amazing distributed systems and technologies to or solutions to support some interesting use cases. For example, in my opinion, like video streaming is still pretty archaic. All the information goes to cloud. Literally, this conversation is happening, is going to cloud, and it's coming to me and coming to you. There is a latency, there is a delay, and the quality is deteriorating. If I do peer-to-peer, can I improve it further? And we all know the inherent challenges with peer-to-peer, and that's the reason it never worked in past. Possibly 5G is going to change that. But imagine our bank information is not centralized. It is decentralized. And it changes the whole dynamics, and it creates different kind of security requirement. It even creates different kind of paradigm that how we are really accessing the information. I always wonder, we have like 6 or 10 or 20 credit card. It's very hard to put all that together at one place and review it, check it. So even today, we are struggling with a lot of these nitty-gritty or a smaller problem, which looks like a pretty simple problem to solve. But let's talk about the biggest problem. The biggest problem, in my opinion, today is, Chetan, companies like Google, companies like Amazon, companies like Facebook have a lot of control on how we even think.
Yeah.
And that concerns me today. And I'm a recipient of it. I'm very happy with the service they provide. But how do you see technology like 5G change that?
So I think they may overlap and they may not. I think there is the whole issue of whether and the regulators and the antitrust bodies are kind of evaluating that idea of monopoly and whether the big companies should be broken up.
It's not what I'm thinking. I'm thinking because you and me come from a very different place. Everything is possible to us. I'm saying is, how do you create a company around it to solve this problem? So you know what? I don't need $1 billion or multi-billion-dollar servers what Google has. I can run the same quality of search with bunch of mobile devices.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
Yeah. So I mean, clearly it's It does provide processing power, probably not at the level what Google or Facebook, the data centers they run, but you could do certain things using these phones. And so instead of going back to the server, you can possibly just go a few hops to cell phones within your neighborhood to provide the data that they are seeing or they are sensing, right? And so it's not centralized, it's decentralized in a certain area. So those things I see, but I don't see that they can start to replace or compete against kind of the massive centralized data centers that some of the bigger players have in the ecosystem.
No, I do agree with you. I believe it is going to be a hybrid world. It's not going to be fully decentralized. It's not going to be fully on the
Yeah,
way it is right now. It is too centralized.
yeah,
So it has to be distributed, because when it is distributed, half of these problems goes away. Then we don't need to worry so much
yeah,
about it, right? That's all I'm trying
yeah,
to say.
yeah,
And the
yeah, yeah,
companies like Amazon, I love Amazon. Great work they have done, phenomenal. They have taught us how to do. I mean, they have completely changed the way we do computing today in a way, up to the
yes,
computer.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
but the challenge we all have it is they are the only player and a sheriff in the town. When we talk about
yeah,
especially e-commerce, they are the only one, and
yeah,
there are a lot of businesses who feel they are being taken advantage of. So
yeah.
the question I have is, when you talk about edge computing and distributed architecture, do you see a distributed architecture even in places like e-commerce?
Yes, and if you look at the players who were able to withstand the pandemic the best, the retailers, were the ones who had invested prior to the pandemic more in their infrastructure. So players like Target, who had private networks running, edge computing infrastructure running in their store, so they can process things faster. They can have new services like you can pick up things from the store and doesn't
Self
put
checkout.
a burden on checkout, doesn't put a burden on their cloud infrastructure, were the ones who were able to get off the ground running. And so I think retailers cannot fight the war on the old terms, right? And so unless they themselves have become a complete digital player and use their physical presence as an asset rather than a liability, they will find very hard to compete with Amazon. But if they are truly transformed digitally and they have a very good sense of end-to-end supply chain, and everything is the information is available on the tips of every employee, I think then you can start to see that operationally their cost reduces tremendously and they can get some of the benefits that Amazon gets from a totally digital distribution.
So let's fast forward. We are living in the metaverse universe. And I know you have
Yeah.
done tremendous work in metaverse. Can you talk a little bit about what is your take of metaverse? Where are we going and how the future look like?
Yeah. So, metaverse is both exciting and it can be very confusing too because different people mean different things about the metaverse. It reminds me of that story of the elephant and the blind man. And so, depending on what part of the elephant you touch, metaverse is that to you, right? And so, to the chipset guy, it looks like, oh, I'm going to sell a lot of chips. To the wireless network guy, they think, oh, everything traffic is going to go over my network. I'm going to make a lot of money, right? The applications like, oh, I'm going to transform the landscape, and there's going to be a huge amount of money there. And so the way I think about metaverse is it's a spectrum of experiences from 3D gaming, which is available today, has been available for 20 years. But then we get into some rudimentary AR experiences to very high level of complexity and network resource intensive AR applications like Pokemon Go game based on location, which requires a lot of AR and location information from the network. That is really not possible in a 4G network. You really require edge computing, you really require 5G to make that work. Then you get into rudimentary VR type of experiences that we are having today with Oculus. And then you get into more sophisticated VR experiences. Then you get into more volumetric type of experiences, which make the presence felt of the person that's in front of you, you're talking to. And then you get into holograms, right? And so there is a wide spectrum of experiences, and they don't necessarily all require a headset, head-mounted display, right? Some you can have on your desktop, some you can have on your phone, Others will require glasses and probably other devices or gadgets that we have not invented yet. And some will require putting on a headset in a stationary environment where you can experience the world that you want to go into. And so I think so. We are in the early stages, right? So 3D stuff is there, rudimentary AR is there, some pockets of sophisticated AR gaming is there. We clearly have rudimentary VR that you can have in a stationary environment. The battery life is not great, 1 to 2 hours. People still have a hard time
Focus.
putting it on for keeping the focus, but that gets better over time. And so, a lot of my inspiration and a lot of inspiration for a lot of people who think about metaverse come from things like Star Wars, right? Where you have been manipulating data in the air, and you get into these domains and experiences that are you cannot have it using desktops or having a cell phones, right? And so, once you get immersed in things like, learning about the galaxies or the universe by actually going into the galaxy through the metaverse, I
Mhm.
think it's just transformative in terms of how you learn and how you engage and even collaborate. Some of the tools that are available are still very rudimentary. We are still trying to push the desktop onto a metaverse screen, which seems idiotic in some sense, but natural in other ways. So I expect metaverse to have new experiences where you can manipulate. Like you shouldn't be. I won't go into metaverse to type things, right? I should be able to just
Talk to it.
information like yeah, talk to it, or it is intelligent enough to bring me the information that I need at that moment, or the data at that moment, right? And so I think there is tremendous opportunity for just changing the paradigm on collaboration, how we just share information or experience information. And I think that's what I'm really excited about, that I think it's going to change education. I'd love to be a student again in the metaverse and learn about history, about the future, about just understanding the information and data better. And that seems quite doable. We will need a lot better tools, both on device side, on the network side. You cannot run a full VR streaming on current 5G networks. You will require 6G networks for that. And so lots of stuff has to be done, but this is like a 20-year journey, yeah, right? And we are just starting in it.
That's great. So that's good. Like a lot of our friends and colleagues are looking at a metaverse. So all I can say is there are tremendous opportunities. Of course, you have to find what makes sense to you, what kind of problems you really want to solve. And as one of my
Sure.
friend always says, is it's a fascinating problem, but is it going to impact billion lives or not? If it's not, then
Yes.
move to the next
Yes.
one. There are plethora of problems, but is it worth
Yes.
solving, right? So think
Yes.
of those
Yes.
problems, as Chetan is
Yeah.
saying, is find those interesting problems which worth solving. So Chetan, we are living in a connected world, and we saw what happened in COVID. I can't even imagine similar kind of calamity happening to us 30 years ago. Our
Hmm.
world would have completely, I mean, we were like on our knees, but still everything was different. Now, fast forward, what do you see happening to propel our world in future, or what is required for us to propel our world in the future when we really talk about connectedness? Because just the fabric of faster speed is not going to do that.
I think that's where the whole notion of intelligence and sensing comes into play. Like we should have better tools for sensing a pandemic that's about to happen.
Mhm.
Um, we should be so technology is not the answer in every case. I think technology works really well when it's mixed with policy, good policies,
Mhm.
and good collaboration with governments and partners around the world. And so we need information, we need intelligence from wherever it's coming from, and sensing from whether it's Africa or Asia or Europe, where are these new pathogens are emerging from, and can we stop them in the tracks or not? So I think that's the sensing part is again a critical one. You need early intelligence systems. The next is if you have that system, you have the early warning, what are you going to do with it? You need very crystal clear messaging that people can understand and absorb. And that's where policy comes into play. Unless you have that, there will be confusing messages, and consumers react and people react very differently. If it's kind of misleading, or there's misinformation, or they're just confusing messages from policymakers and governments. So I think that needs to get addressed. The third area is around collaboration. I think the collaboration piece just shot up during COVID. The speed with which we got the vaccines was clearly unprecedented, and it has led to, if there is a silver lining to this dark cloud, the impact of mRNA vaccine is having an impact on other diseases as well, right? And so what we learn from this cycle will have an impact on other diseases that will definitely serve humanity. And so I think collaboration, better sensing, and just better policy is what will carry us through when the next one comes around.
So that brings us to almost to the end of our segment, Chetan. I can talk to you for hours and economy and phenomenal conversation we had when we met a few weeks ago. If I ask you to have 3 predictions for next decade, what will those be and why?
So, clearly we work in the technology space, and so we love and breathe that.
Of course.
Over the last few years, I have become to appreciate other areas that impact technology. And it's not technology. We cannot think about technology in isolation. You have to think about industrial policy. You have to think about geopolitics. You have to think about equity and justice. And so all these factors play a role, and we have to think about them simultaneously and the interconnection of them with each other. And so as I think about kind of the future, I think one of the biggest things that is on mind of policymakers is geopolitics, especially US-China. What happens to US-China will impact everything and everyone. And so I really hope that we find a way that where these two powers can live together in harmony. Obviously, there will be competition, but we don't. It becomes a trap, Thucydidean trap, right? That was between Athens and Sparta thousands of years ago, right? And so I hope that in the short term, I'm not very optimistic, but in long term, I hope that the cooler heads will prevail, and we don't let geopolitics to become a deterministic factor in how the economy works. So that's geopolitics is number one that we have to pay attention to. I think on the technology front, building on the thesis, the long wave thesis, I think this will be a decade where the next 10 years will see more innovation than we saw in the last 100 years. And because of the parallel streams of technologies and the progress we are making in each of these areas, edge, AI, 5G, robotics, and so on and so forth, I think the intersection of these will create enormous new companies as well as new innovations that will be quite disruptive. And the third area is we have to talk about climate change. And so climate change is one of those things that will impact everyone, is already impacting everyone. And we have to find solutions, both technology solutions as well as policy solutions. And so I'm hopeful that both can come together to leave our kind of the next generation a better place than we have found it.
Thank you so much, Chetan, for your time today. For our audience, there are several things I've learned today. So number one I learned is really seeing things differently and connected. And the term Chetan talked about it, connected intelligence, whether it's device or people or anything with the tech. And adjacent to that can be different kind of technologies. Geopolitical plays a major role. And I do see that it didn't used to play a role in the average Joe's life, maybe 30 years ago, to the extent it does now. So we have to pay attention to it. We have to get involved. We have to figure it out how we can help and do something about it. And that extend to even climate change. We cannot stay disconnected with the climate change happening globally. So we have to be the voice. We have to play our role in that. And the last one is, which is one of my favorite topic, is metaverse So Facebook renaming itself to Meta is just the beginning. There will be plethora of challenges, but there will be amazing, amazing opportunities in front of us. So let's work on that, find those opportunities, and create a better world for everyone. Once again, thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you will tune in next one too. Thank you so much, Chetan.
Thanks. Thanks, Sanjeev.